The horse was poisoned, and it seemed like the end until his owner decided to do the impossible on a summer afternoon. In the heart of Texas, the air was hot and thick. Tom Gallagher's ranch had always been a peaceful refuge where he and his loyal horse, Charlie, an impressive quarter horse, lived their routines. Charlie was much more than a horse to Tom. He was a symbol of perseverance and a loyal companion. The horse, with his shiny coat and intelligent eyes, was the pride of the ranch, a living legend to the small community that admired his strength and agility. That morning, Tom noticed something was wrong. Charlie was lying in the pasture, his eyes dull and his breathing heavy. Tom's heart raced as he realized his friend was weak, and his instincts told him it wasn't just a simple illness. Something darker was at play. He immediately called the vet, but nothing seemed to help, and the situation only worsened with every hour. The suspicion of poisoning loomed over them like a threatening shadow. Tom began to wonder if someone could have wished harm on Charlie. He didn't have any known enemies, but Charlie's success and popularity in the rodeo circuit and life on the ranch might have sparked jealousy in someone. This thought troubled him deeply, and he could barely hide the fear that consumed him. While he waited for a response from the vet, with tear-filled eyes and trembling hands, Tom spent the following hours by Charlie's side, recalling all they had overcome together. He knew he couldn't lose his companion. Suddenly, a decision came to his mind. If conventional treatments weren't working, he would do whatever it took, even if it seemed impossible, to save his horse's life. As the sun set on the horizon, Tom made a promise to himself. He wouldn't give up on Charlie. He was willing to risk everything to save his loyal friend, even if it meant confronting the unknown and diving into a desperate search for a cure. If you're moved by this story and want to know what happens next, make sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel. At dawn, Tom was exhausted but determined. He had spent the night by Charlie's side, listening to every irregular breath and feeling helpless in the face of the situation. The vet returned early with a grim expression, confirming Tom's suspicions. Charlie had been poisoned, but the exact type of poison was still a mystery. The vet's words echoed in Tom's mind, reinforcing what he already knew. Time was running out. He needed to act fast and start his own investigation. Tom began to recall the past few days, looking for any clue, recent visitors, strangers on the ranch, any detail that could point to the culprit. He remembered a recent visit from a man named Rick Jensen, an old acquaintance who also worked with horses. Rick was a tireless competitor, and Tom knew he harbored some envy toward Charlie's fame in the rodeo circuit. But could Rick really be capable of something so despicable? Tom refused to believe that someone he had known for so long could do this, but the suspicion remained lodged in his mind, still, without answers. Tom decided to investigate the place where Charlie usually stayed. He searched the stable and pasture, looking for anything out of place. That's when he found a strange stain on the ground near Charlie's water trough. It looked like a dark liquid that had dried into a crust. Tom knelt down and carefully took a sample. He was no expert, but something about the substance gave him a chill. He knew he would need help identifying it. Determined to follow every lead to the end, Tom decided to take the sample to a local university where he knew a chemistry professor. Along the way, his heart grew heavy. The thought that someone might want to harm Charlie deeply unsettled him. He felt responsible for protecting the horse, not only out of loyalty, but because of the love they shared. Now he was getting closer and closer to confronting a disturbing reality. Once he arrived at the university's lab, he handed the sample to the professor, who immediately began analyzing the substance. Tom anxiously watched as the expert conducted his tests, hoping for any sign of hope. Finally, after a few minutes of analysis, the professor turned to him with a serious expression on his face. The poison was highly toxic and difficult to treat. The battle to save Charlie had only just begun. With the confirmation that the poison was rare and deadly, Tom felt the weight of urgency increase. Every minute that passed was a silent battle for Charlie's life. The university professor explained that if treated incorrectly or too late, the damage to the horse's body could be irreversible. The anguish Tom felt turned into determination. He knew he couldn't just sit back and passively watch the poison spread further through his friends, body. Tom began searching for alternative treatments, something unconventional. He remembered old stories his father and grandfather had told him about herbs and natural remedies that could heal wounds and even poisons. He knew that in the past, cowboys used these practices to treat animals when modern medicine didn't have answers. Tom refused to leave Charlie at the mercy of a faint hope, but at the same time, he felt he had no choice but to try everything. On a cloudy morning, he traveled to the nearby small town where a local healer, known for his skills with plants and natural remedies, still had his medicine workshop. The man, an old man named Hank, was an enigmatic figure with a history of mysteries and successes that almost seemed supernatural. Tom didn't believe in miracles, but he was willing to try anything. When he told Hank about the poison that had affected Charlie, the old healer looked him in the eye with an unexpected intensity, as if he already knew what Tom was going through. Hank suggested a rare herb formula that could neutralize the poison, but there was a price to pay. The recipe could only be prepared with ingredients that were difficult to find. The most complicated of all was a specific type of plant that grew in the distant mountains, a place known for being dangerous with steep trails and treacherous terrain. Tom knew he had no choice but to risk it, but the fear of losing Charlie before he could find the cure consumed him. As he prepared for the long journey to the mountains, Tom felt the pressure of the situation intensifying. He knew his time was running out, and the thought of facing the dangers of the mountains seemed small compared to the possibility of losing Charlie. But something in his heart told him that if he didn't try, if he didn't do the impossible, he would never forgive himself. The pain of seeing his horse so weak and helpless was stronger than any fear. He set off, not looking back, determined to do whatever it took to save his friend. The journey to the mountains was harder than Tom had imagined. The heat of the day and the humidity of the afternoons made the hike exhausting. He knew he was in unfamiliar territory, far from the comfort of the ranch and the familiar trails he knew. With every step, his body grew more fatigued, but the image of Charlie, weak, was always on his mind, keeping him moving. He couldn't fail, not now. The path to the mountains was treacherous. Tom had to cross dense forests where low branches scratched his skin, and slippery rocks nearly made him fall several times. At one point, he had to use a rope to descend a steep cliff. The strong wind and darkness started to make the hike even more challenging. However, with each step, Tom felt a deeper connection to his goal. The pain in his muscles seemed to disappear when he thought of Charlie's loyalty and the bond they had shared over the years. After hours of struggling through the rough terrain, Tom finally reached the spot where the rare herbs grew. It was a secluded field hidden among rocks as if protected by an invisible force. The place had an eerie calm, an absolute silence that seemed to be waiting for someone like Tom. He knelt, exhausted, and began searching for the plants Hank had mentioned. Every leaf and root he touched seemed to confirm the urgency of what he was doing. He knew that if he lost any more time, he wouldn't be able to save Charlie. When he finally gathered the last of the necessary herbs, a sense of relief washed over him, but it didn't last long. The sky, which had been clear until then, was starting to fill with dark clouds. Tom knew he should return immediately, but the treacherous terrain and the impending storm made him hesitate. He didn't know if he could make it back in time to save Charlie. The hours of effort already weighed on him, and the fear of failure now felt more tangible than ever. The wind began to pick up, and Tom realized the storm was no longer on its way but right above him. With the herbs in hand and his heart heavy, he decided to descend. Even knowing the conditions would worsen with every second, the storm hit with full force as he began his descent down the mountain, and with each step, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The only thing he could think of was that if he didn't return with the cure, Charlie wouldn't stand a chance. The storm was not just a battle against nature, but against time. The storm came in full fury, the biting wind making the trees shake, and the torrential rain making it hard to see, making every step more uncertain. Tom could barely see, with water pooling in puddles and thick mud forming underfoot. The weight of the herbs, now soaked, felt like it doubled the load he was carrying, but the thought of Charlie, vulnerable and suffering, kept him moving. He couldn't stop, not now. The descent was dangerous, and when Tom lost his balance on a slippery rock, he found himself falling uncontrollably. He rolled for several meters, his ribs hitting sharp stones. The pain was unbearable, and for a moment, he thought he wouldn't be able to continue. However, the thought of Charlie pushed him forward. He was so close to saving his friend. Tom forced his body to rise, his bones creaking and his vision blurry from the pain. He clung to the rocks and with fierce determination began climbing again as the storm raged around him. Tom knew he couldn't afford to rest. He had to get there in time. Every second that passed felt like a sharp knife cutting deeper into his hope. When he finally reached the bottom of the mountain, his feet were bleeding, his body was exhausted, and his thoughts were in complete disarray. But the way back to the ranch still seemed like an eternity, even with the open field ahead. The journey back felt endless. The storm finally began to die down, and the now clear sky revealed the first stars of the night. The silence after the chaos was almost deafening, but Tom couldn't rest. He looked into the distance, wondering if Charlie was still alive and if he still had a chance. He felt the weight of the herbs in his hands as a small comfort, but the fear of uncertainty still dominated his mind. Would it be enough? He started to doubt his own courage, but soon remembered Charlie's strength and the battles they had already faced together. When he finally reached the ranch, the sun was already setting. Tom ran to the stable, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew time had been against him, that the storm had delayed him more than he wanted to admit. But when he entered the stable, he saw Charlie. The horse was lying down, weak but still breathing. Tom, breathless, immediately prepared the herbal mixture. He applied the remedy, his hands trembling, praying it would be enough. The silence around him seemed almost suffocating, but there was a strange sense of hope in the air. Tom's struggle was far from over, but he knew that perhaps the impossible had a way. The night passed slowly and silently. Tom couldn't pull himself away from Charlie, even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. He stayed by the horse's side, watching every movement, every breath Charlie took. Tom's heart was in a constant state of unrest, as if waiting for a change, a sign that the medicine was actually working. He knew he couldn't leave Charlie alone for even a second. With every passing hour, he felt the tension building. However, deep into the night, something began to change. Charlie, who had been motionless and feverish, slowly lifted his head as if waking up from a nightmare. Tom, in disbelief, watched wide-eyed as his horse moved its legs, trying to rise. The pain Tom felt in his own body seemed to ease as he saw the small movement of life. It was a tiny victory, but one of vital importance. He was no longer alone in this fight. Now, Charlie was fighting to dot by dawn. Charlie was standing, shaking his head as if trying to remember where he was. Tom's face lit up with a relieved smile, but he knew they were still not out of danger. The horse seemed weak, its movements uncertain, and Tom felt he couldn't relax just yet. He watched Charlie warily, checking for signs of improvement, but also preparing for any setbacks. The battle wasn't won, but the fight was far from over. The following hours were marked by slow and steady progress. Charlie, still unstable, took a few more firm steps, and the color of his coat seemed to return slightly to its healthy tone. Tom knew this was a good sign, but the road to recovery would be long. He spent the entire day by Charlie's side, giving him water and food, trying to ensure the horse wasn't overexerted, but also watching as his strength slowly returned. What had once seemed impossible was now beginning to take shape as a reality. As the sun began to set again, Tom felt a sense of gratitude he had never experienced before. He knew that thanks to his determination and Charlie's struggle, the horse's life had been saved. But more importantly, he understood the true meaning of the bond between them. The friendship, loyalty, and courage that united them had been tested in ways Tom had never imagined. He was ready to move forward, knowing he had won the greatest battle of his life, and with that, Charlie's future seemed brighter than ever. In the days that followed, Tom watched Charlie with a mix of relief and caution. The horse, although visibly stronger, was still far from the vigorous animal he once was. His muscles were weak, his joints stiff, but there was something in Charlie's eyes that conveyed a quiet resilience. Tom knew recovery would be a slow process, but simply seeing his friends stand, look around, and even take a few steps toward him made the weight on Tom's shoulders lighten a little. He knew the worst was over, but the journey to full recovery was still ahead. Tom spent his days caring for Charlie with the same tireless dedication he had shown before. Now wiser and more attentive to the horse's signs of weakness, the nights were long and quiet, and he often found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. The feeling of helplessness he had felt when he saw his horse poisoned, on the brink of death, still haunted him. But at the same time, he recognized something he hadn't seen before, the strength that lived within Charlie. Something he had always known, but had never been tested in such a way. And more importantly, he began to realize how deeply his horse's loyalty had shaped his own life. One afternoon, as they walked side by side through the field, Tom finally had a moment to himself. He stopped for a moment and looked at the horizon, the distant mountains, and the vast fields surrounding him. Life on the ranch had always followed a certain routine, a steady rhythm, but nothing had prepared Tom for the experience he had just lived. He remembered his father's words, who always said that the greatest test for a man was loyalty to those he loved. Tom now understood more than ever the weight of those words. He felt that through this experience, he had found an inner strength he hadn't known before, a determination that would guide him from that point on as time passed. Charlie's health continued to improve. The horse was no longer the fragile skeleton Tom had found in the darkest days, but a strong and proud companion. The two of them, side by side, continued to build a new story, one marked by overcoming challenges, sacrifice, and renewal. Tom didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he and Charlie would face whatever came their way together. That night, as the ranch quieted down and the starry sky covered the earth, Tom lay down, but before falling asleep, he looked at Charlie, who was lying next to the stable, watching the same sky. Something in his heart told him that this struggle had irreversibly changed them. They now shared something deeper, something that neither poison nor storm could erase, a bond forged in the fire of adversity, and the silent promise that no matter how tough life's journeys would be, they would never be alone. Spring finally arrived, bringing with it the rebirth that Tom and Charlie had long awaited. Flowers began to bloom across the field, and the ranch, once marked by fear and uncertainty, now seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Charlie, though still a bit slower than before, was back to his routine. He and Tom spent their mornings working together, and the days were quieter, with the tension of the past few months finally dissipating. The horse was recovering well, but there was a subtle change in his behavior, a calmness that Tom hadn't noticed before. He seemed more alert, more present, as if the trauma had transformed him, making him more sensitive to what was happening around him. Tom, in turn, also experienced a sense of renewal. He didn't know exactly when the pain of losing Charlie stopped being a constant worry, but he knew that his friend had returned to him stronger than ever. Life on the ranch continued, but now there was a lightness in everything. The daily tasks were no longer a burden, but a symbol of a restored routine. Tom and Charlie were more connected than ever, a silent partnership of mutual trust. Every glance between them seemed to carry an untold story, a reminder of everything they had been through together. As life on the ranch went on, Tom began to reflect more on what truly mattered. Money and hard work, once his greatest focus, now seemed secondary. He was beginning to understand that the most precious things were not those that could be bought or owned, but rather those that were earned through struggle, time, and dedication. The bond between him and Charlie had taught him this harshly and undeniably. Now he saw the world from a different perspective, one that was richer and deeper, and it was something he knew he would never forget. However, a sense of apprehension still lingered around Tom, even though he tried to push it away. He feared that the peace he had found was only temporary, that something might interrupt it again. But as time passed, that fear began to fade. He knew that life would always be unpredictable, but he also knew that now he had the tools and wisdom to face any challenge. With Charlie by his side, he felt he could endure any storm, any adversity that came his way. That afternoon, as Tom and Charlie walked through the field, Tom felt a deep sense of gratitude for the chance to start over. The past, with its scars and uncertainties, was behind him. What mattered now was the present, the work, the friendship, and the certainty that, together they could face anything. He looked at Charlie, whose eyes were shining under the sun, and seemed to share the same silent peace. The storm had passed, and with it, they both had found a new purpose. Summer arrived with its full force, bringing hot days and long afternoons, where the sound of the wind in the trees blended with the song of the cicadas. The ranch, now fully restored, looked like a place of harmony and balance. But something in Tom's heart warned him that things weren't as settled as he wanted to believe. While Charlie grew stronger every day, an unease hung in the air, a sense that the peace they had won might only be temporary. Tom knew that the true test wasn't his horse's physical recovery, but the strength of the bond they had formed. What would he do when the next storm came? One morning, as he was making coffee and Charlie grazed peacefully in the distance, Tom received an unexpected visitor. An old friend of his father's, a man named Earl, showed up at the ranch. Earl was a war veteran, someone whose life had been marked by losses and battles, and who always knew how to recognize moments of crisis. He looked at Tom with a serious expression, as if he knew something was about to happen. After a brief conversation, Earl revealed that local authorities were investigating Charlie's poisoning. Someone, probably a neighbor, might be behind it. The weight of these words fell on Tom like a rock. If someone was indeed trying to destroy everything he loved, he would have to face it head-on. The news left Tom stunned, but at the same time, the pain of betrayal reignited a flame of determination. Within him, he was no longer the same man he had been months ago, weak and insecure. He knew he had to act, that he couldn't let anyone keep threatening his life and land. By Charlie's side, he had found a strength he hadn't known before, a courage that only revealed itself in the deepest adversities. But at the same time, doubt consumed him. If it were someone from his own community, someone he knew well, how would he deal with it? The burden of confronting someone he trusted awaited Tom. Determined to uncover the truth, Tom decided to investigate on his own, without involving anyone else, even though he knew it would put his own safety at risk. Each step he took seemed to weigh heavier, as if he were venturing into unknown territory. He visited the neighbors, observed their properties, and scanned carefully for any clue that might point to who was behind the poisoning. But the more he searched, the more the feeling of distrust consumed him. What once seemed like a simple life on the ranch was now immersed in complexity and secrets. Who could be hiding the truth? And what would motivate someone to destroy what he and Charlie had built? The end of the day brought another wave of unease. Tom knew he was getting closer to something, but he still couldn't see the full picture. He looked at Charlie, who was calm in his stable, seemingly unaware of the tensions building around them. Yet even with the weight of uncertainty on his shoulders, Tom felt that something was about to happen. He didn't know exactly what, but one thing was certain: the next step would be crucial. He wouldn't turn back, no matter what awaited him. The next morning, Tom woke up early, his heart racing with the anxiety that had consumed him since Earl's visit. He felt as if he were standing on the edge of an abyss, with the truth about to be revealed. But he still didn't know if he was ready to face what might come. Over the past few days, he had been watching everything more closely, every gesture from his neighbors, every word they said. There was something in their eyes, a tension disguised as normality. But Tom felt that something deeper was happening, something he couldn't ignore. It was then that, passing by Mark's farm, one of his closest neighbors, Tom noticed something strange. The smell in the air was different, a strong, unpleasant odor that he couldn't identify right away. As he approached the fence, he saw Mark coming out of a building at the back of the property, and his behavior immediately raised suspicion. Mark, who had always been cordial, seemed more tense, more hurried than usual. That's when Tom remembered Earl's words: anyone who wants to hide something always leaves a trace. He didn't think twice before approaching and asking what was going on, his voice firm but not fully revealing his suspicions. Mark, upon hearing the question, was surprised but quickly composed himself. He claimed that nothing was wrong, but the hesitation in his eyes and the way he avoided making eye contact with Tom didn't go unnoticed. The tension between them was palpable. Tom could no longer pretend everything was fine. He felt that the key to solving the mystery was right there, but the feeling of betrayal consumed him. How could someone from his own community, want to do something so cruel? He knew he needed to confront Mark with the truth, but the fear of discovering something even worse made him hesitate. It was then that Mark, clearly uncomfortable, began to give hurried explanations. He talked about an old disagreement he had with Tom years ago, something Tom had almost forgotten. However, what Mark revealed next made Tom's stomach turn. "I didn't want to do this, Tom," he said, "but someone offered me a large sum. They knew you wouldn't pass up the chance to save your horse, and they wanted to see you lose everything." Mark's words hit like a bomb, and disbelief overwhelmed Tom. What he didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that there were much greater forces at play than he had ever thought. Tom looked at Mark for a moment. Shock and anger mixed in his chest. He wanted to scream, wanted to do something to purge that pain, but he felt a cold calm settle within him. His life, the ranch, and Charlie had been used as pawns in a much larger game. A conspiracy he could never have imagined existed in his own backyard. What lay before him wasn't just a personal betrayal, but a manipulation that threatened to destroy everything he believed in. Tom looked at the horizon one last time before making a decision. The time for doubt had passed. He knew he would have to fight once more, not just for Charlie but for everything he had built, and the future he could still create with his horse. With anger finally subdued by clarity, Tom turned and walked back to his farm. He knew that despite all the hardships, he was no longer alone. He had Charlie, and with that, he would have enough strength to face whatever came next. Any shadow that tried to take his place, the future was still uncertain. But Tom now knew what he needed to do. The sun was setting, and Tom felt the weight of everything that had happened in his life. He knew this moment would change everything. He now held the truth about Preston Harper, the man responsible for almost destroying what he loved most. Charlie, his horse. There was no more time for doubts or regrets. It was time to put an end to the story. When Tom arrived at Preston's mansion, the vastness of the place seemed to try to intimidate him, but Tom remained firm. He was no longer a weak man nor someone willing to hide behind fear. When Preston greeted him with that cold smile, Tom already knew the word game was about to end. "I knew you'd come," Preston said, trying to maintain his superiority. "But justice has a price, Tom. Are you ready to pay it?" Tom didn't hesitate. "The only thing I'm taking from you, Preston, is the end of all of this. You're going to pay for what you did," he replied firmly, his voice full of authority. The conversation was short, but charged with tension. Preston tried to justify his actions, claiming that Tom and his ranch were a threat to his empire. But Tom was no longer willing to listen to excuses. "I'm stronger than you think, Preston. It's not your power that will bring me down. I have something to fight for." With those words, Preston had no choice but to surrender, and the truth came to light. Back at the ranch, Tom felt a deep sense of relief. But he also knew that this battle had left scars on his soul. Charlie, now fully recovered, was there, by his side, as loyal as ever. Tom looked out at the horizon, his heart pounding, feeling that the true victory wasn't just in the justice he had achieved, but in the new beginning he could finally embrace. And so ends this incredible journey. If you enjoyed the story, give it a like and subscribe for more exciting content like this. Don't forget to hit the bell to stay updated with the channel's news. See you next time.